Elena's feet were killing her. She'd been on them for 6 hours straight, and the shift wasn't even close to being over. She carried a tray of champagne glasses through the crowded dining room, weaving between tables like she'd done 1,000 times before. The Grand Meridian wasn't just any restaurant. It was the kind of place where people wore watches that cost more than her car, where a single bottle of wine could pay her rent for a month. She set the glasses down at table 7, forcing a smile even though her lower back was screaming at her. The couple barely glanced up from their conversation about their vacation home in the Hamptons. Elena had gotten used to being invisible. To them, she was just part of the furniture, something that brought food and disappeared. 3 years. That's how long she'd been doing this. 3 years of carrying heavy trays, memorizing complicated orders and pretending that the smell of expensive perfume and filet mignon didn't remind her of everything she'd given up. Before this, she'd been studying at the conservatory. Classical piano. It had been her whole world since she was 6 years old. Sitting on her mother's lap at the piano bench, learning her first simple melody. But life has a way of changing your plans whether you're ready or not. Her parents died in a car accident when she was 25. One moment they were driving home from her recital, proud and happy, and the next moment they were gone. Just like that. And suddenly Elena wasn't a music student anymore. She was a 25-year-old with a 12-year-old brother who needed someone to take care of him. Miguel was 15 now, and every day she worked at this restaurant was for him. So he could have a normal life, go to school, not worry about where his next meal was coming from. She dropped out of the conservatory without a second thought, because that's what you do when someone you love needs you. But that didn't mean it didn't hurt. Tonight was going to be especially long. The restaurant was hosting some kind of fancy charity event. Elena didn't know all the details, just that it was a $5,000 a plate dinner for people who had more money than they knew what to do with. The whole staff had been called in and the kitchen was chaos. She could hear the head chef yelling at someone about the sauce for the duck. She picked up another tray, this one loaded with appetizers that looked like tiny works of art. Seriously, who pays $40 for 3 bites of food? But she kept that thought to herself and headed back out to the dining room. The ballroom had been transformed for the event. Crystal chandeliers sparkled overhead, and white tablecloths covered every surface. In the center of it all sat a beautiful grand piano, black and gleaming under the lights. Elena felt something twist in her chest when she saw it. She hadn't played a real piano in months, couldn't afford to rent practice time at the conservatory anymore, and the keyboard in her tiny apartment wasn't the same thing at all. She caught herself staring and quickly looked away. Mr. Hawthorne, her manager, had eyes like a hawk. He didn't tolerate daydreaming, especially not on a night like this. Martinez. His voice cut through the noise of the dining room. Table 12 needs water. Move it. Elena nodded and hurried to the service station. She grabbed a pitcher of water with lemon slices floating in it and made her way to table 12. The people sitting there were deep in conversation about the stock market. She filled their glasses quietly, efficiently, trying not to let the water splash. As she worked, she couldn't help but overhear snippets of conversation from nearby tables. Someone was complaining about their daughter's piano teacher, saying the woman didn't understand technique. Elena bit her tongue. She wanted to tell them that technique wasn't everything, that music was supposed to come from somewhere deeper than just hitting the right keys at the right time. But waitresses don't interrupt guests to give them music lessons. The evening wore on. Course after course came out of the kitchen. Elena's section was the busiest, of course. She always got the difficult tables because she never complained and rarely made mistakes. Tonight she had a table of businessmen who kept ordering more wine and getting louder. An elderly couple who sent back their soup twice. And a woman in so many diamonds that Elena wondered how her neck didn't hurt from the weight. During a brief moment when all her tables were satisfied, Elena leaned against the wall near the kitchen door. Her coworker James came up beside her, looking just as exhausted as she felt. "You surviving?" he asked. "Barely," Elena admitted. "My feet are going to fall off." "At least the tips should be good tonight," James said hopefully. Rich people feeling charitable and all that. Elena nodded, but she wasn't holding her breath. In her experience, the wealthier the customer, the worse the tip. They seemed to think that just dining at the Grand Meridian was doing the staff a favor. She pushed off the wall and headed back toward the dining room, but something made her pause. Through the open door to the ballroom, she could see the piano again. No one had played it yet. She'd assumed there would be music during dinner, but the space around the instrument remained empty. Her fingers twitched at her sides, unconsciously moving through the positions of a Chopin nocturne she'd played at her last recital. That felt like a lifetime ago now, back when her biggest worry was whether she'd nailed the difficult passage in the third movement, not whether she'd have enough money to pay the electric bill. "Elena, you with us?" James waved a hand in front of her face. "Yeah, sorry," she said, shaking herself out of the memory. "Just tired, but it wasn't just tiredness. It was that deep ache that came from living a life that wasn't quite yours. From knowing that somewhere inside you was a person you used to be, someone with different dreams and possibilities." Back in the dining room, she noticed people starting to look around, checking their watches. The main course had been cleared and dessert wasn't scheduled for another 20 minutes. Usually that gap would be filled with entertainment. Elena overheard the event coordinator, a stressed-looking woman with a clipboard, talking urgently on her phone. "What do you mean you can't make it?" the coordinator was saying, her voice rising. "The event started an hour ago. You were supposed to be here before dinner." Elena kept moving, refilling water glasses and removing empty plates, but she was listening. It sounded like whoever was supposed to play the piano had bailed. The coordinator's face was getting redder by the minute. "Food poisoning? Tonight? Are you kidding me right now?" The coordinator looked like she might cry. "No, I understand, Can you recommend anyone else?" "Anyone at all?" Elena felt bad for her. This was clearly a disaster in the making. These wealthy guests had paid a lot of money for this evening, and they were starting to get restless. She could see people at her tables checking their phones, looking bored. The woman in diamonds caught Elena's arm as she passed. "Excuse me, but when is the musical entertainment supposed to start? This is getting rather dull." "I'm not sure, ma'am," Elena said politely. "I can check with the event coordinator if you'd like." "Please do," the woman said dismissively, already turning back to her companion. "For $5,000 you'd think they could at least keep us entertained." Elena made her way toward the coordinator, who had just hung up the phone and looked like she might actually start crying. Before Elena could say anything, Mr. Hawthorne appeared, his face tight with stress. "What's the situation?" he asked the coordinator. "The pianist called in sick," the woman said, her voice shaking. "Last minute. I've called everyone I know, and no one's available on such short notice. Everyone's either already booked or out of town. I don't know what to do." Mr. Hawthorne's jaw clenched. This kind of thing could ruin the restaurant's reputation. These weren't just regular customers. These were the people who funded museums and sat on charity boards. The kind of people whose opinions mattered in this city. Elena stood there, frozen, as an absolutely crazy idea started forming in her mind. An idea so terrifying that her hands started to sweat just thinking about it. She opened her mouth, then closed it again. What was she thinking? She couldn't. She hadn't performed in front of anyone in 3 years. She'd barely practiced on her cheap keyboard. And these people? They expected perfection. They expected a professional, but that piano was just sitting there, silent and waiting. And despite everything, despite the fear and the years away and the knowledge that she'd probably embarrass herself, Elena felt something stirring inside her chest. Something that had been asleep for a long time. Maybe some part of her hadn't given up after all. Mr. Hawthorne called an emergency staff meeting in the kitchen. Everyone crowded in between the industrial ovens and the prep stations, looking confused and worried. When the manager called a meeting in the middle of service, it was never good news. "Listen up," Mr. Hawthorne said, running a hand through his thinning hair. "We have a situation. The pianist for tonight's event has canceled. Food poisoning. The coordinator is scrambling to find a replacement, but it's not looking good." A few people groaned. They all knew what this meant. Unhappy guests meant bad tips and potentially worse. The Grand Meridian's reputation depended on flawless events like this one. "Does anyone know a pianist?" Mr. Hawthorne asked, his voice almost desperate. "Anyone at all who could play for maybe 30 minutes while we figure this out? Even someone who's decent would be better than nothing." The kitchen fell silent. Elena felt her heart start to pound. Her mouth went dry. She should say something. She could help. But the words were stuck somewhere in her throat, blocked by 3 years of self-doubt and fear. James, standing next to her, suddenly nudged her ribs with his elbow. "Hard. Ow," she whispered. "What was that for? Didn't you study piano?" James said quietly. Then, before Elena could stop him, he raised his hand. "Mr. Hawthorne." Elena used to study piano at the conservatory. Every head in the kitchen turned to look at her. Elena felt heat rush to her face. She wanted to disappear, to sink through the floor tiles and never come back up. Martinez? Mr. Hawthorne looked at her with surprise. Is that true? Yes, but, Elena stammered. I studied for a couple years, but that was a long time ago. I haven't really played seriously since I started working here. I'm not that good anymore. Can you play or not? Mr. Hawthorne asked bluntly. Elena's hands were shaking. Technically, yes, but Mr. Hawthorne, I can't perform in front of those people. They're expecting a professional. I'm a waitress. I haven't performed in 3 years. I'll embarrass everyone. Mr. Hawthorne looked at her for a long moment. His expression softened slightly. Something Elena had rarely seen before. He pulled her aside, away from the other staff members who were trying not to stare. Elena, he said quietly, you've worked here for 3 years. You're reliable. You show up on time, you don't complain, and you do good work. I'm not asking you to give a concert. I'm asking you to sit at that piano and play something, anything for 15 or 20 minutes while the coordinator finds someone else. That's all. But I'm in my uniform, Elena protested weakly. I'm wearing my work shoes. I haven't even looked at the music I used to play in months. None of that matters, Mr. Hawthorne said. What matters is that we have a room full of very wealthy, very bored people out there who paid a lot of money for entertainment. Right now, you're all we've got. Elena felt like she might throw up. This was insane. She couldn't do this. But when she looked at Mr. Hawthorne's face, she saw something she hadn't expected. Trust. He actually believed she could help. Just 15 minutes? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. That's all I'm asking, he confirmed. Elena closed her eyes and took a deep breath. Every logical part of her brain was screaming at her to say no, to run away, to let someone else deal with this problem. But there was another part of her, a part she'd tried to bury over the last 3 years, that was saying something different. Okay, she heard herself say. I'll try. Mr. Hawthorne's face flooded with relief. Thank you. Really. I won't forget this. Elena untied her apron with trembling hands and set it on the counter. Several of her co-workers patted her shoulder or gave her encouraging smiles as she walked toward the kitchen door. James gave her a thumbs up. You've got this, he mouthed. Elena wasn't so sure about that. She walked through the dining room, suddenly hyper-aware of how she looked. Her black pants and white shirt were standard waitress attire, nothing special. Her shoes were the comfortable non-slip kind that every server wore. Her hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail. She looked exactly like what she was, a woman who'd been carrying trays and refilling water glasses all evening. The event coordinator spotted her and rushed over, looking confused. Can I help you with something? Mr. Hawthorne sent me, Elena explained. I used to study piano. I can play for a bit if you need me to, just until you find someone else. The coordinator looked her up and down, clearly skeptical, but desperation won out over doubt. You can really play? This is a very sophisticated crowd. I know, Elena said. I'll do my best. Fine, the coordinator said, though she didn't sound convinced. Just try not to make mistakes, okay? These people notice everything. Elena nodded, even though that comment made her anxiety spike even higher. She walked toward the piano on legs that felt like they belonged to someone else. The beautiful instrument seemed to grow larger with every step she took. By the time she reached it, it looked enormous, intimidating. The dining room wasn't completely silent, but it was quiet enough that people started noticing her. She could feel eyes on her back as she adjusted the piano bench. Her hands were shaking so badly she had to clasp them together to make them stop. Someone at a nearby table said, not quietly enough, "Who's that? Did they get someone from the staff to play? This should be interesting," another voice responded. Well, beggars can't be choosers, I suppose. I just hope she knows more than chopsticks. A few people laughed. Elena felt her face burn with embarrassment and something else. Anger, maybe. Or determination. She sat down at the bench and looked at the keys. 88 black and white keys, the same as every other piano she'd ever played. She placed her hands on the keys and something inside her shifted. The cool, smooth ivory felt like coming home. Muscle memory from thousands of hours of practice came flooding back. Her fingers knew where to go, even if her mind was panicking. Elena closed her eyes and let herself remember. Her mother's patient voice teaching her scales. Her father recording her first recital on his phone, beaming with pride. The way her teacher would nod when she finally mastered a difficult passage. The feeling of losing herself completely in the music, of becoming something more than just herself. She could do this. Maybe not perfectly, but she could do it. Elena decided to start with something she knew by heart, something she'd played so many times that her fingers could find the notes even in her sleep. Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major, her mother's favorite piece. The first notes came out tentatively. She could hear the uncertainty in them, the hesitation. Somewhere in the room, someone sighed impatiently. But Elena kept going, and gradually the music started to flow more naturally. The fear began to fade, replaced by something deeper and more powerful. She was playing the piano again. Really playing. Not just pressing keys on her cheap keyboard at home. The sound filled the ballroom, rich and full and alive. The Steinway was an incredible instrument, responding to every subtle change in pressure, every emotion she poured into the keys. Elena opened her eyes slightly and was startled to realize that the room had gone completely quiet. No one was talking. No one was looking at their phones. The clinking of silverware and glasses had stopped. Everyone was listening, actually listening. She could see faces now, and they looked different than they had before. The skepticism was gone. Instead, people were leaning forward, their expressions softening. The woman in diamonds had stopped complaining and was watching Elena's hands move across the keys with something like wonder. For the first time in 3 years, Elena wasn't invisible. She wasn't just part of the background, something to be ignored or ordered around. She was a musician, and people were hearing her, really hearing her. The fear was still there, sitting like a knot in her stomach, but it was quieter now. The music was louder, and as the nocturne built toward its gentle climax, Elena felt something break open inside her chest. All the grief she'd been carrying, all the dreams she'd set aside, all the exhaustion and sacrifice and loneliness of the last 3 years. It all came pouring out through her fingers and into the keys. She wasn't playing for the wealthy people in their expensive clothes anymore. She wasn't playing to fill 15 minutes of time. She was playing for herself, for her parents who couldn't be here to see this, for Miguel who she was working so hard to support, and for the girl she used to be who'd loved music more than anything in the world. That girl wasn't gone after all. She'd just been waiting for the right moment to come back. As the last gentle notes of the Chopin Nocturne faded into the air, Elena held the final chord, letting it resonate through the ballroom. She lifted her hands from the keys slowly, almost reluctantly. The silence that followed felt different than the silence before. It was deeper somehow, more complete. Then someone started clapping. Then another person. Then the entire room erupted in applause. Elena looked up, startled. She'd been so lost in the music that she'd almost forgotten there were other people in the room. Faces that had been skeptical and dismissive minutes ago were now warm and enthusiastic. Some people were even standing up, giving her a standing ovation for a single piece. But Elena wasn't done. Mr. Hawthorne had asked for 15 minutes, and she'd barely played 5. More importantly, something had awakened inside her, and it didn't want to go back to sleep. Her hands returned to the keys. This time she chose Debussy's Clair de Lune, Moonlight. It was a piece that required subtlety and feeling, not just technical skill. Her teacher had once told her that anyone could learn to hit the right notes, but making those notes mean something. That was what separated a pianist from a musician. Elena had spent 3 years serving other people, making herself small and invisible. But right now at this piano she didn't have to be small. She could be as big as the music needed her to be. The opening phrases of Clair de Lune drifted through the ballroom like morning mist. Elena's fingers danced across the keys, finding the sweet spots where the piano responded with the most beautiful tone. This was why she'd fallen in love with piano in the first place. Not for the applause or recognition, but for moments like this when the music transported her somewhere else entirely. She could feel the audience moving closer, drawn by the sound. Out of the corner of her eye, she saw people leaving their tables, standing near the piano to get a better view. The woman in diamonds was dabbing at her eyes with a napkin. A man in an expensive suit stood with his arms crossed, nodding along to the rhythm, his earlier skepticism completely forgotten. The middle section of the piece built in intensity, and Elena let herself sink deeper into it. Her hands knew what to do. All those hours of practice, all those scales and exercises and repetitions that had seemed so boring at the time, They'd prepared her for this. Her fingers flew across the keys, executing the difficult passages with a confidence that surprised even her. She thought about Miguel, probably at home right now doing his homework or playing video games with his friends. He'd been 12 when their parents died, just a kid who'd lost everything in a single moment. She'd done her best to give him a normal life, but she knew it hadn't been easy on him either. All the times she'd come home exhausted from double shifts, too tired to help with homework or cook a proper dinner. All the time she'd had to say no to things because money was tight, but Miguel never complained. He got good grades, stayed out of trouble, and told her every day that he appreciated everything she did. Just last week, he'd asked her why she never played piano anymore. When she'd said she didn't have time, he'd looked at her with those big brown eyes so much like their father's and said, "You should make time. Lena, you're really good." Maybe he was right. The piece was approaching its conclusion. That beautiful, haunting section where the melody seems to float above everything else. Elena played it with her whole heart, thinking about her parents and how proud they'd been when she got accepted to the conservatory. Thinking about the dreams she'd set aside and wondering if maybe, just maybe, it wasn't too late to pick them back up again. The final notes rang out, soft and pure, and then faded into nothing. Elena sat still, her hands resting on her lap, barely able to believe what had just happened. She'd done it. She'd actually done it. The applause this time was even louder than before. People were shouting "Bravo!" and "Encore." Several people had tears streaming down their faces. Elena stood up from the bench, unsure of what to do. Should she bow? Should she wave? She'd never been good at this part, the performance aspect beyond the actual playing. But then she caught sight of Mr. Hawthorne standing in the doorway to the kitchen. His mouth was hanging open in shock, and when their eyes met, he gave her a small nod of approval. Behind him, she could see James and the other staff members crowding around, trying to see what was happening. Elena sat back down. 15 minutes, Mr. Hawthorne had said, but she wasn't ready to stop yet. That scared, hesitant girl who'd walked to the piano 10 minutes ago wasn't the same person sitting here now. Something had shifted. Something had broken open. For her third piece, Elena chose something bold. Rachmaninoff's Prelude in C-sharp minor. It was technically demanding, dramatic, and emotionally intense. Some people called it the Bells of Moscow, because of the way the opening chords rang out like church bells. It was ambitious. Maybe too ambitious given that she hadn't practiced it in years. But right now, Elena didn't care about playing it safe. Her hands crashed down on the opening chords, filling the ballroom with sound. This wasn't gentle or subtle like the previous pieces. This was raw and powerful and demanding. Elena attacked the keys with a passion she didn't know she still had. The piece required her to reach across the keyboard, to use her whole body, not just her fingers. She leaned into the dramatic sections, feeling the power of the music flow through her arms and into the piano. Sweat formed on her forehead from the physical exertion, but she didn't care. All the frustration of the last 3 years, all the nights she'd cried herself to sleep missing her parents, all the times she'd felt trapped and helpless, it all came pouring out through the music. She wasn't playing Rachmaninoff anymore. She was telling her own story, and the piano was her voice. The piece built and built, crescendo after crescendo, each one more intense than the last. Elena's fingers flew across the keys so fast they were almost a blur. She could hear people gasping in the audience, could feel their attention locked on her completely. And then came the final section, where the piece turns darker and more introspective before building to one last dramatic climax. Elena played it with everything she had left, pouring her whole soul into those final measures. When she struck the last chord, her hands were shaking and there were tears streaming down her face. She didn't try to hide them. The silence that followed wasn't just quiet. It was profound. Elena kept her hands on the keys, her head bowed, breathing hard from the exertion and the emotion. She felt raw and exposed, like she'd just shown these strangers something deeply personal. Then the room exploded with noise. People weren't just clapping anymore. They were on their feet, shouting, cheering. The applause was thunderous, almost overwhelming. Elena looked up, blinking away tears, and saw that many of the guests were crying too. The woman in diamonds was openly sobbing. An elderly man was clutching his wife's hand, both of them looking at Elena like they'd just witnessed something sacred. Elena stood up from the piano bench on shaky legs. She'd only meant to play for 15 minutes to buy time until they found a real pianist. But she'd been playing for almost half an hour, and she'd given these people something they hadn't expected. She'd given them something real. An older woman started making her way through the crowd toward the piano. She was elegant in the way that money and good breeding create, wearing pearls and a designer suit that probably cost more than Elena made in 6 months. But her eyes were kind, and when she reached Elena, she took both of her hands. "My dear," the woman said, her voice shaking with emotion, "I have been attending concerts for 40 years. I've heard performances at Carnegie Hall at the Kennedy Center all over the world, and I have never ever been so moved by a performance as I was just now." Elena didn't know what to say. "Thank you" seemed inadequate. "What's your name?" the woman asked. Elena Martinez." "Well, Elena Martinez, that was extraordinary. Who are you? Where did you study? I want to know everything." Before Elena could answer, other people crowded around. Everyone wanted to talk to her, to shake her hand, to tell her how incredible she was. Mr. Hawthorne pushed through the crowd, looking proud and also slightly overwhelmed by what was happening. The event coordinator appeared at Elena's elbow, looking completely different than she had earlier. The stress and skepticism were gone, replaced by amazement. I don't even have words. You saved the entire evening. More than saved it. Everyone's going to be talking about this for months." Elena felt dizzy from all the attention, from the adrenaline crash that was starting to set in. Her hands were still shaking. She'd just done something terrifying and exhilarating and completely crazy, and she wasn't sure yet how to process it all. The elegant older woman was still holding her hand, looking at her intently. "You must tell me your story," she said. "How is someone with your talent working as a waitress? There has to be more to this." And suddenly Elena found herself telling this stranger everything, about her parents' accident, about leaving the conservatory to take care of Miguel, about the 3 years of barely getting by, working double shifts and putting her dreams on hold. It all came tumbling out, and the woman listened to every word with complete attention. The elegant woman listened to Elena's story without interrupting once. When Elena finished, explaining how she'd had to drop out of the conservatory and hadn't really played seriously in 3 years, the woman's eyes were glistening with tears. "My name is Catherine Westbrook," the woman said, "and I think we need to have a proper conversation, but not here in the middle of all this chaos. Do you have a card? A phone number?" Elena almost laughed. "A card?" She was a waitress. "I can write down my number," she said. Catherine pulled out her phone, something sleek and expensive, and handed it to Elena. "Put your contact information in here. All of it. Phone, email, address, everything." Elena's hands were still shaking as she typed in her information. She had no idea what was happening, but something told her this moment was important. Catherine took the phone back and immediately sent Elena a text so she'd have Catherine's number too. "I'm going to call you tomorrow," Catherine said firmly. "We have a lot to discuss." "What you just did, Elena, that wasn't just impressive, that was transformative. Do you understand what I'm saying?" Elena didn't, not really, but she nodded anyway. More people wanted to talk to her. A man who introduced himself as a music critic for the city's newspaper asked if he could interview her. A woman who owned an art gallery wanted to host a performance at her next opening. Someone else asked if she gave private lessons. The attention was overwhelming, and Elena felt herself starting to panic. Mr. Hawthorne, sensing her distress, stepped in. "All right, everyone, let's give her some space. Elena still has a shift to finish." It wasn't true, not really. The evening was winding down, and Elena had definitely earned the right to leave early. But she gave him a grateful look for the rescue. As the crowd reluctantly dispersed, Mr. Hawthorne pulled her aside. "Martinez, I don't even know what to say. That was incredible. Take the rest of the night off." "You've earned it. Are you sure?" Elena asked. "I'm sure," he said. "Go home. Rest. We'll talk tomorrow about everything." Elena changed out of her uniform in the staff bathroom, her mind still reeling. When she looked at herself in the mirror, she expected to see someone different, someone transformed. But it was just her regular face looking back, tired and a little overwhelmed, but still just her. She gathered her things and headed out the back entrance where staff parked their cars. The autumn air felt good on her flushed face. She was halfway to her beat-up Honda when she heard footsteps behind her. "Elena, wait." She turned to find Catherine hurrying after her, which was impressive given the high heels the woman was wearing. I'm sorry, Catherine said, slightly out of breath. I know you must be exhausted, but I couldn't let you leave without saying something. What I told you in there, I meant every word. I don't throw around compliments lightly, and I've heard a lot of pianists in my life. Thank you, Elena said. That means a lot. No, you don't understand, Catherine said. I'm not just some rich woman who likes music. I used to be a concert pianist myself years ago, and I currently sit on the board of the city's Philharmonic. I also run a foundation that supports talented musicians who need financial assistance. Elena felt her heart start to pound. Oh, I want to help you, Catherine continued. If you're interested, there are programs, scholarships, opportunities. You shouldn't be serving tables with talent like yours. It's criminal. I have responsibilities, Elena said quietly. My brother. I can't just drop everything and go back to school. I don't have the luxury of focusing on music full-time. What if I told you there might be a way to do both? Catherine asked. What if there were options that could help you support your brother, while also continuing your musical education? Elena wanted to believe her. God, she wanted to believe it was possible. But life had taught her to be cautious about things that sounded too good to be true. I appreciate it, Elena said carefully. But I've been taking care of Miguel for 3 years. I can't take risks with his stability. I understand, Catherine said. Which is why I'm not asking you to make any decisions tonight. Just promise me you'll answer when I call tomorrow. Let me show you what options exist. That's all I'm asking. Elena thought about Miguel at home, probably asleep by now. She thought about the piano sitting in their tiny apartment, the cheap keyboard that didn't sound anything like a real instrument. She thought about the feeling of playing tonight, of being fully herself for the first time in 3 years. Okay, she said. I'll answer. Catherine smiled, and it was warm and genuine. Good, get some rest. You've had quite a night. The drive home felt surreal. Elena kept replaying the evening in her mind, hardly believing it had actually happened. She'd walked into work expecting another exhausting shift serving wealthy people who wouldn't even look at her.
Instead, she'd ended up playing piano for them, moving them to tears and getting the contact information of someone who might be able to change her life. When she got home, the apartment was dark.
Miguel had left the porch light on for her like he always did. Elena unlocked the door quietly, trying not to wake him, but she found him on the couch in his pajamas, apparently waiting up for her. You're home late, Miguel said, rubbing his eyes. Everything okay? Elena sat down next to him and suddenly she was crying. Not sad tears, but something more complicated. Relief and fear and hope all mixed together. Lena, what's wrong? Miguel asked, alarmed. Nothing's wrong, Elena said, laughing through her tears. Something really weird happened at work tonight. I played piano for all these rich people at this fancy event. Miguel's eyes went wide. Seriously? How did that happen? Elena told him the whole story and watched his face light up with excitement and pride. When she got to the part about Catherine and the foundation, Miguel grabbed her hands. Lena, this is amazing. You have to do it. Whatever she's offering, you have to at least listen. But what about you? Elena asked. What about bills and rent and everything? I'm 15, not 5, Miguel said. You've been taking care of me since I was 12. Maybe it's time to take care of yourself too. Mom and Dad would want that. Elena pulled him into a hug. Sometimes her little brother was wiser than she gave him credit for. That night, Elena couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about the piano, about the way it felt to really play again, about the looks on people's faces when she'd finished the Rachmaninoff. She got up and sat at her keyboard in the dark, playing quietly so she wouldn't wake Miguel. It wasn't the same as the Steinway. The keys felt cheap and plasticky, and the sound came out tinny and electronic. But it was still music, and it was still hers. Her phone buzzed on the table next to her. A text from an unknown number, though she knew who it had to be. I hope you're resting and not overthinking everything. Call me tomorrow after 10 a.m. We have a lot to discuss. You have a gift, Elena. Don't let fear or obligation keep you from sharing it with the world. Catherine Elena read the message 3 times. Then she saved Catherine's number in her phone and went back to playing, her fingers moving through scales and arpeggios, warming up muscles that had been dormant for too long. The next morning, Elena woke up with butterflies in her stomach. She made breakfast for Miguel, got him off to school, and then paced around the apartment for an hour watching the clock. At exactly 10 o'clock, she called Catherine. Elena, I'm so glad you called, Catherine answered immediately. Are you free this afternoon? I'd like you to meet some people. What kind of people? Elena asked nervously. People who can help, Catherine said. The dean of the conservatory, for one. I called in a favor and he's agreed to hear you play. If he likes what he hears, and I have no doubt that he will, there are scholarship opportunities available. Full tuition, actually. Elena sat down hard on the couch. Full tuition? There's more, Catherine continued. I spoke with a family I know, the Hendersons. They have 3 children who need a piano teacher and live-in music tutor. They're willing to provide room and board plus a generous salary. You and your brother could both live there. Miguel would have his own room, access to their pool and gym, and you'd be able to continue your studies while teaching their children. That's impossible, Elena whispered. Things like that don't just happen. They do when you have talent and someone believes in you, Catherine said gently. I'm not saying it will be easy. The conservatory program is rigorous, and teaching 3 children while being a full-time student will be challenging. But it's possible, if you want it. Elena thought about last night, about the feeling of playing that beautiful piano, about the way the music had poured out of her after being bottled up for so long. She thought about her mother's voice saying, "Music is your gift, mija. Don't ever let anyone take that away from you." I want it, Elena said, her voice stronger now. I definitely want it. Good, Catherine said, and Elena could hear the smile in her voice. Then let's make it happen. The next few weeks felt like a dream Elena was afraid she might wake up from. Catherine moved fast, setting up meetings and auditions and introductions so quickly that Elena's head spun trying to keep up. The audition at the conservatory was terrifying. Elena walked into the same building where she'd studied 3 years ago, and everything looked exactly the same. The practice rooms lined the hallways, and she could hear scales and concertos being played behind closed doors. It was like stepping back in time, except this time she was older, more tired, and carrying 3 years of real-world experience that made her see everything differently. Dean Morrison was a stern man with silver hair and sharp eyes that seemed to see right through her. He sat behind a grand piano in his office, arms crossed, waiting. Catherine sat in the corner, giving Elena an encouraging nod. Play something, the dean said without preamble. Whatever you'd like. Elena's hand shook as she sat at the bench. This was different than playing for the wealthy people at the charity event. Those people hadn't known what to expect. Dean Morrison knew music inside and out. He'd taught some of the best pianists in the country. He would hear every mistake, every weakness, every place where her technique had gotten rusty. She chose Bach's Prelude in C major from the Well-Tempered Clavier. It was technically simpler than some pieces, but it required perfect clarity and control. There was nowhere to hide in Bach. Every note had to be exactly right. Elena took a deep breath and began to play. The first few measures were shaky, but then something clicked. She stopped thinking about Dean Morrison watching her and just focused on the music. Bach had written this piece hundreds of years ago, but it still spoke to something universal and timeless. Order and beauty and mathematical perfection made into sound. When she finished, there was silence. Elena kept her hands on the keys, afraid to look up. When did you drop out? Dean Morrison asked. 3 years ago, sir. My parents died and I had to take care of my brother. And you've been working as a waitress since then? Yes, sir. More silence. Elena finally gathered the courage to look up. The dean's expression was unreadable. Your technique has deteriorated, he said bluntly. There are gaps in your practice that are obvious. Your left hand is weaker than your right, and your posture needs work. Elena felt her heart sink. She should have known this was too good to be true. However, Dean Morrison continued, you have something that can't be taught. You have genuine musicality. You understand what the music is trying to say, and you have the emotional maturity to communicate that to an audience. Technique can be rebuilt. That other quality, some people study their whole lives and never develop it. Elena held her breath. I'm approving the scholarship, he said. You'll need to work twice as hard as the other students to catch up on what you've missed. It won't be easy. I know, Elena said. Thank you. I won't let you down. See that you don't, he said, but his expression had softened slightly. Catherine tells me you have unusual circumstances. We'll work with your schedule as much as we can. Meeting the Henderson family was equally nerve-wracking. They lived in a neighborhood where the houses had names instead of just addresses, where the lawns were maintained by professional landscaping crews, and where Elena's beat-up Honda looked painfully out of place in the driveway. Mrs. Henderson answered the door. A friendly woman in her 40s with kind eyes and laugh lines. You must be Elena. Come in, come in. Catherine has told us so much about you. The house was beautiful but lived in, not the sterile showplace Elena had feared. There were kids' drawings on the refrigerator, soccer cleats by the door, and a golden retriever that immediately tried to befriend her. The 3 children ranged from 7 to 14, all eager to meet their potential new piano teacher. The youngest, Sophie, climbed immediately onto Elena's lap and asked if she knew any Disney songs. The middle child, David, was shy but clearly interested in music. The oldest, Rachel, was a teenager with typical teenage skepticism about the whole arrangement. I don't really want to learn piano, Rachel said bluntly. Just so you know. That's okay, Elena said, appreciating the honesty. But maybe you could just try it for a while. If you really hate it after a few months, we can talk about it. Rachel seemed surprised that Elena wasn't going to force the issue. Okay, fair enough. Mr. Henderson worked in finance and traveled a lot for work. He shook Elena's hand firmly and got straight to the point. Catherine vouches for you, and that's good enough for us. The suite above the garage has 2 bedrooms and a bathroom. You and your brother would have your own space. We'd expect you to teach the kids piano 4 days a week, an hour each. Beyond that, your time is your own to study and do whatever you need to do. And Miguel? Elena asked. My brother? He's welcome here, Mrs. Henderson said warmly. He'll go to the same school as Rachel. We'll include him in family dinners if he wants, or he can do his own thing. Whatever makes him comfortable. Elena felt tears threatening and blinked them back. I don't know how to thank you. Just teach our kids to love music the way you clearly do, Mrs. Henderson said. That's all we ask. Moving in was surreal. The suite above the garage was bigger than the apartment Elena and Miguel had been sharing. Miguel got his own bedroom for the first time in 3 years. There was a small kitchen, a living room, and best of all, Mrs. Henderson had arranged for an upright piano to be moved into the space for Elena to practice on. Miguel walked around touching everything like he couldn't believe it was real. Lena, there's a bathroom with a bathtub. Actual bathtub. Do you know how long it's been since I've taken a bath instead of a shower? Elena laughed, though she was crying too. Make sure to thank the Hendersons. They're being incredibly generous, I will, Miguel promised. Then he hugged her tight. You did it, Lena. You actually did it. I'm so proud of you. Starting back at the conservatory was harder than Elena expected. She'd forgotten how demanding the program was, how many hours of practice were required, how much theory and history and technique had to be mastered. She was older than most of the other students, and she felt it. While they stayed up late partying, she went home to teach piano lessons and help Miguel with his homework. But she loved every exhausting minute of it. Her hands hurt from practicing. Her brain hurt from studying. She fell into bed every night completely drained. But it was the good kind of tired, the kind that came from doing something meaningful, from working toward a goal that mattered. Teaching the Henderson kids turned out to be one of the best parts. Sophie was a natural, picking up melodies by ear and playing with uninhibited joy. David was methodical and careful, wanting to understand the theory behind everything. Even Rachel, who'd been skeptical at first, started to warm up to the piano once Elena let her choose modern songs to learn instead of just classical pieces. The story of the waitress who'd wowed a room full of wealthy people spread through social media. Someone at the charity event had recorded part of her performance on their phone, and the video went viral. Comments poured in from around the world. People calling her inspirational, musicians wanting to collaborate, job offers and performance requests. It was overwhelming and exciting and terrifying all at once. Catherine became not just a benefactor but a friend and mentor. She invited Elena to concerts, introduced her to other musicians, and gave her advice about navigating the classical music world. You have something special, Catherine told her over coffee one afternoon. Don't let anyone make you feel like you need to fit into a specific mold. Your unique path is what makes you interesting. 6 months after that night at the Grand Meridian, Elena gave her first public recital at a small concert hall downtown. She was so nervous she thought she might throw up backstage. But then she walked out and saw the audience. Miguel was there in the front row wearing a tie he'd borrowed from Mr. Henderson. Catherine was there with a group of friends. The Hendersons had brought all 3 kids. Mr. Hawthorne from the restaurant had come, along with James and several other former co-workers, and scattered throughout the audience were faces from that charity event. The woman in diamonds, the man who'd made the skeptical comment about the kitchen staff. They'd all come to see what the waitress would do next. Elena sat at the piano and placed her hands on the keys. This time there was no fear, only excitement. This was her story now. Not the tragedy of losing her parents or the sacrifice of giving up her dreams, but the triumph of finding her way back to them. She began to play. 2 years later, Elena performed her debut concert with the City Philharmonic. The concert hall was packed, every seat sold out weeks in advance. She wore a beautiful gown that Catherine had helped her pick out, though she still felt more comfortable in jeans and t-shirts. Miguel sat in the front row, 17 now, and looking so grown up in his suit. He'd gotten into a good college with a partial scholarship, pursuing engineering. He'd found his own path just like she had. The Henderson children were there too. Sophie, who was now taking advanced lessons from someone else because she'd surpassed Elena's teaching abilities. David, who'd decided he wanted to be a composer. Even Rachel, who still claimed she didn't really like piano, but showed up to every performance Elena gave. Mr. Hawthorne was there, retired now but beaming with pride. He still told everyone about the night his waitress had saved the charity event and changed her life. Catherine sat in her usual spot in the third row, center seat. She'd become like a second mother to Elena, guiding her through the difficult years of study and performance anxiety and self-doubt. When Elena had wanted to quit, overwhelmed by how hard it all was, Catherine had been there to remind her why she'd started, and scattered throughout the audience were familiar faces. Music critics, fellow musicians, students from the conservatory, people who'd seen that viral video and wanted to hear her play in person, but also regular people, working people, waiters and nurses and teachers and shop clerks who'd been inspired by her story, who saw in her a possibility that dreams don't have to die just because life gets hard. As Elena walked onto the stage, the applause washed over her like a wave. She took her seat at the concert grand, the same kind of Steinway she'd played that first night at the Grand Meridian. She adjusted the bench, placed her hands on the keys, and took a breath. In that moment before the music started, Elena thought about everything that had brought her here. Her mother teaching her first chords, her father recording her childhood recitals, the terrible day when everything changed, the 3 years of exhaustion and sacrifice, the moment she'd decided to walk to that piano even though she was terrified. Catherine's belief in her, Miguel's support, the kindness of strangers who'd become family, all of it had led to this moment. Elena began to play and the concert hall filled with music. Her music. She was exactly where she was supposed to be, doing exactly what she was meant to do. After the concert, during the reception, a young woman approached her nervously. She was wearing a restaurant uniform, clearly on break from work at the venue's cafe. "I'm sorry to bother you," the woman said, "but I just wanted to say thank you. I'm studying music education at community college and I work 3 jobs to pay for it. Sometimes I want to quit because it's so hard, but your story reminds me that it's worth it. That good things can happen if you don't give up." Elena took the woman's hand. "What's your name?" "Nina. Nina, don't quit. The world needs your music, whatever form it takes. And when it gets hard, remember that you're not alone. We're all out here, fighting for our dreams and helping each other along the way."